Sink clap.
So I can sink
Why is it? Oh, because I was imagining like a drain. Like a blah, 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 blah. So I'm Emma Cousin and I'm a painter. So the work that was acquired by the Arts Council collection was called Tsog, T-S-O-G. So the practice is rooted in drawing, as in I get a lot of images come to my head and then it's almost like a sort of visual Tourette's that I need to get them out. So then I'll draw whatever they are without really questioning it, and then sometimes follow those lines or those inquiries, those ideas. And often they'll come with words, so language is quite formative in the process. I can't always explain that, like it's not obvious necessarily, but I think there's a link to, like I was thinking about the way metaphors work, that they can both obscure and identify something at the same time. So that duality of language is helpful if you're having these strange ideas that don't make sense. And then sometimes they'll get worked up and sometimes they'll be translated onto tracing papers and then tessellated and oscillated to form structures that then the idea is more formalised. So like the idea of digging to carry the landscape, or the idea of a metaphor, or whatever it is. So then I can really kind of see that through. The language often is also based in research, and Tsog is specifically a tool, an ancient, like medieval tool. So it's something that the peat cutters in Outer Hebrides would use to cut the peat, which is like deep, deep layers of soil. And I was watching peat cutters for a long time and trying to kind of annotate, draw, find a way to note down that kind of slicing through the earth and then laying out these clods in sort of linear, really beautiful, neat rows that then became like walls of chocolate or something. They were amazing. And I was thinking about tooling up the body. So tooling up is something that I like in terms of what I'm doing, like could I use the finger to make a finger, or the gesture of an arm to make an arm, but also that you could append things to the body and it would be able to do different, like the function would change. So if they're digging, then to actually have that attached to the hand, or the hand becomes a Tsog, is really useful. That was part of the connection. And then I suppose the image came back to me because after giving birth, I had a few like discombobulation issues. So I went to see a chiropractor to kind of figure out what was going on. And then they, without even thinking, she said, I'm putting you back together like pieces of the landscape that have become dislocated. And it was just a really like immediate image of that Tsog painting. Like the image literally drew itself in my mind, and I kind of scrabbled off the table and like drew it and ran away to the studio. Who they are is always an interesting one, because I think, I think of them as avatar. I like the word avatar because it can mean so many things. It can mean like a visual representation of a person, and that could just be me, so they could all be me, but they could all be stereotypes of a woman, stereotypes of these Tsog diggers, like people from that time. It also can link to like deities, so thinking about concepts or philosophies, you could bring those things into an avatar. Avatars can also be a feeling of, like a translation of an emotion. So sometimes I'm thinking, this is the dominant one, or this is the one that's having the thing done to it, or this is the one who's relinquishing control, or this is the one that feels sad. And I can't really explain that. It's often to do with the weight of the balance of the composition more than anything. Like redness has to happen here, so that's what's happening. Or the face has a like really pointy nose, so that one's like the kind of inquisitive, challenging, scared, alert one or something. So the kind of geometric dimensions of the physique will then tell me a bit more about who they are, and then that leads back to that expression of emotional sensibility or something, personhood. I think humour is really important. It's not important in terms of like, I'm trying to make a funny painting, because I think that wouldn't work. It's important because it's a way to break things down. It's like a coder in itself to disrupt. I enjoy that it's often linked to like feelings of embarrassment, shame. You know, if you fancy someone, you kind of get embarrassed, but it's the same colour that you go in your, really joyful. So it's like the fact that it's so proximate to emotional responses, I find really interesting and useful. I also think it's important because I'm using bodies. So setting these things up can sometimes feel quite like there's a lot of jeopardy, potential violence or some interaction that we don't quite understand. So the humour that kind of emits from that is funny because it's not intentional. So it's like a secondary or tertiary thing that is delivered, and it can dispel some of that unease, and that's quite mystical. Comedy's different because comedy's setting up something to entertain, and I couldn't say that's what I'm trying to do originally, but I think they do entertain me when I'm making them. So the setups sometimes do become funny because the collapses, the extensions, the comedy of like stretching something to point over there to tell you it's like cartoons. The limitations, simplifications, or the idea that someone's got a massive nose because they need to smell is really funny but also useful. So it has like a logic. That we're all like little gods, painters, like especially painters maybe, that you're like, oh, I've created this new vision of the world, like this aesthetic space or whatever, and then you're expecting someone to come and see this thing, it's for show. So it is hilarious, it's sort of a ridiculous setup. And I think there's something also, if we're also reverent to painting's history, then it's quite audacious to set yourself up in dialogue with that and say like, I've made something new, because really is that even possible at this point? So there's almost like an automatic self-referential collapse that's really funny, that's like the joke's on me because it might not even work, maybe it's terrible. And I think in that painting specifically, the Tsog painting, in terms of place as well, the figures in the background, it has 3 figures in the painting sort of centrally, but then in the background there's all these crowd of figures, and they're actually stolen from a Rembrandt painting of the anatomy lesson. And I wanted to kind of have I was thinking about that painting as I was thinking about being put back together like the Bodleian anatomy sessions. I did anatomy at university, so I remember that, putting the body back together physically and like folding the flaps back and stuff. I had that image and I remembered that painting, so I went and looked at the painting in books and stuff, and then thought, well, what happens if I just transpose that crowd, so they were now travelling through history as like historical avatars to then witness this putting together of this woman, because also they're all men, they're all of a certain age, they're all kind of very stuffy, and those anatomy lesson paintings are kind of, again, hilarious because it's a crowd of people watching a dead person be like taken apart and put back together to learn about, like, I don't know, healing. It's a really ironic situation. So they're in the background. So it's almost like, again, the joke's on me that I was like, oh gosh, what else can happen in this painting? How do I have that sense of being watched? And then it was like I was being watched by Rembrandt, trying to realise that. So then I put him in the painting.